Introduction. Looking back at more than half of the century, it has been observed that the World War I of 1914 to 1918 had a great and tremendous impact on the world and the developments across the countries of the world in the next 50 years. At the same time, the world also witnessed enormous and great innovations in the field of genetic sciences and electronics, which also accelerated the speed of the transportation with the use of the advanced automobiles and the airplanes. However, with the good things also came the bad effects. The World War I also opened doors to the new age of violence that had a great contrast to the era of everlasting peace and contentment that had preceded the World War I. During the early period from 1815 to 1914, peace had prevailed in Europe. Although there were some exceptions of local wars that were fought with the use of the traditional weapons and in comparison to the World War I were much shorter in duration and imparted smaller destruction to life and property. Most of the African countries and that of Asia were quite inactive as they were under the effects of colonialism which was imposed by the European powers of imperialism. The diplomatic relations were totally kept secret and were conducted in a hurried manner by the top officials who would touch with the respective home governments by means of coded letters or couriers rather than the telegrams. After the phase of 1914, the small and little wars, however, exploded into global conflicts that outraged the whole world and lasted for several years. These wars were now fought with bigger weapons including the submarines, air missiles, tanks and much more, which caused substantial loss to life and property all over the world. At the same time, in countries and continents like Africa and Asia, the dark-skinned and the yellow-skinned population remained no longer under the rule of others, and they too started the struggle to end the European dominations of the colonies in their countries. They too started to fight for the establishment of their power and independence. During the conduct of the international relations, the caution and the wisdom of the experienced ambassadors were quite undermined by the special envoys who had insufficient knowledge about the international relations and about the increasing tendency of the top authorities to stay their minds and hearts through the radio to the entire world. This fact actually disturbed the secrets of the diplomatic negotiations. As the turbulent times began in 1914, the possible causes of the war and the responsibility of its outbreak remained the greater problems which were of high historic interests and that of deep political importance. The subject gave rise to a great number of controversial literature with respect to the different views of the great authors of the world, and the literature fell into three separate periods. In each period, the scope and the value of the work were greatly dependent on the evidence or proofs which were available to the writers. During the first period of the World War I, between 1914 to 1919, the authors or the writers who wrote about the immediate causes of the war were greatly dependent on the apologies made by the prominent men who were considered responsible for the outbreak of the World War I, and the color scripts, which were the small and highly precise collections of the diplomatic documents that were issued by the principal governments of each country or the great power that was involved. The writings of these writers and the times of the outbreak of the World War I were intended to prove the honesty and wisdom of the conduct of each powerful nation to throw the blame at each other for the responsibility of the outbreak of the war. Much of the literature during this period was badly affected and wrapped around the prejudice, wartime hatred and the political propaganda of each participant in the war. The assertions that were put forth by the writers during this time were on the side of the possible winners or the victors, which was summed up by the Versailles Treaty. This implied that the war was the result of the sole responsibility of the aggression reflected by Germany and its allies. The second period of the war, between 1920 to 1930, was quite notable for the publication of the complete and reliable collections of the diplomatic documents, which related to both the crisis of the July 1914 and also to the events which took place after 40 years. The extensive and the unprecedented revelations of the secrets in public from the archives was initiated by the German Republic. Soon, the other governments of the great powers also followed the footsteps of Germany. The French and the German collections comprised of as many as 40 volumes and were concerned with the international relations as far as the Franco-Prussian War. Chapter 1. The immediate and the underlying causes. In the work of the great Greek historian Thucydides, he had mentioned the occurrence of the World War I as the difference between remote or underlying and the immediate causes of the war as the precise moment of the ancient civilization when Spartan military triumphed over the democracy of the Athenian government. This distinction is made between the gradual collection of the inflammable materials which got heaped up over a long period of time and the final lightning spark which starts the Holocaust in the form of the Great World War I. This distinction has been applicable to the World War I in a rightmost manner. For those who failed to understand this distinction have been in a confused state with regard to the responsibility of the war, as the responsibility of the underlying causes does not necessarily coincide with the responsibility of the immediate causes of the World War I. Some countries might have years to blame the World War I for creating such a situation which has been dangerous to peace, but they might have little to contribute to the causes of the war, and vice versa as well. If you have been questioning about the causes of the war, it could have passed through 3 phases. During the first 2 phases, the discussion has been centered around the question of the immediate causes from the assassination of the Austrian Archduke on June 28th at Sarajevo to the outbreak of war between England and Germany on 4th of August. In the third phase of the immediate causes, the scholars, however, began to question on the remote cause of the war. Let us have an insight into each phase in a detailed manner. The discussion of responsibility, 1914 to 1919. During the World War I and the Versailles Peace Conference, the discussion was concerned with regard to the responsibility of the immediate causes of the outbreak of the war. It implied more than on anything greater than what hatred, national prejudice, and deliberate misinterpretation of the propaganda. It was also based on the public statements made by the officials and on the collection of the official documents which were published by the government of each country after July 1914. The first of these documents was the preliminary memoir and documents concerning the outbreak of war, which was common as the German White Script. It was laid on 3rd of August before the Reichstag, which in the words of the German Chancellor was put under the influence of the overwhelming events. The main purpose of this document was to prove to the Germans that Germany was fighting a war of self-defense against the Russian aggression. The document was supported by 27 telegrams and letters which fitted into the argument exactly, but were not presented in the proper chronological sequence. The White Script, however, made a poor impression in the regions outside Germany. In contrast to the White Script of Germany, another document was launched which was named as the British Blue Script. It had 159 documents which were arranged in proper chronological order. The Blue Script, in comparison to the White Script, seemed quite convincing and fairly complete. It gave the impression that Sir Edward Grey had strived for the preservation of peace, but had been thwarted in his efforts after facing rejection by Germany for all peace proposals. Another document, named as the Russian Orange Script, was published on 7th of August with 79 documents to emphasize the Russia's efforts to establish peace during the World War I. A Belgian Grey Script with 79 documents gave the details of the Germany's violation of the international law in disrespecting the neutrality of Belgium. The discussion of the responsibility after 1919. New documents on the immediate causes. A second phase of the immediate causes of the World War I started with the publication of the Kautsky documents. These documents made it clear that Germany had not wanted or plotted for a European war. The Kautsky document was published in December 1919, which was the consequence of the German Revolution at the end of the war. In contrast to the White Script, this document consisted of 1,123 documents which were arranged in strict chronological order and allowed to speak for themselves. Memoirs and recollections. In addition to the several diplomatic documents of different countries, there was also a flood of apologetic memoirs and recollections from men who played significant roles during the World War I in 1914. Underlying causes of the war. To reach to the underlying causes of war, there are so many complexes and reached-out theories to explain the diplomatic history of Europe since 1870 back to the age of Louis XIV. It also involved the technical study of the naval and military forces of the several countries, including the factors like the plans of campaigns of the countries, the relation of the military and the civilian authorities in each country, the fear of psychology and other factors, including the conceptions of navalism and militarism as the underlying causes of the World War I. The analysis of the complex theory began with a disruptive and powerful agency during the French Revolution, which has gathered strength, which is known as nationalism. Then comes the question of the political and psychological concern of religion, race, education, democracy, and other popular forms of prejudice. As the underlying causes of the World War are said to be economic problems and the intricate political issues which might have arisen out of the transformation of the society from the past hundreds of years by the modern industrial system in England, which subsequently shifted and penetrated to other forms of the society and the world. There were also problems of excess population, foreign markets, food supply and raw materials, including the accumulation of the capital investment seeking abroad and the colonial possessions. In addition, the influence of the newspaper and the press media also played a major role in being the main cause of the World War I. Chapter 2. The system of secret alliances and the domination of the Eastern Empires, 1871 to 1890. The consequences of the Franco-Prussian War. The Franco-Prussian War reversed the situation wherein the situation of the World War I got reversed and which lasted for another 200 years. After a span of 30 years into the war, the position of Germany got weakened during the 17th century. It got economically exhausted after the terrible conflict with Europe, which left its soil tempered completely. In terms of politics, Germany got weak by its division of the multitude of the states, which differed in size and character, and also by the increasing rivalry for leadership in the growing powers of the Hohenzollerns and the decaying power of the Habsburgs. It was being continually the subject of the French policy of Mazarin and Richelieu, which aimed at keeping her weakened and divided. Germany was also subject to the invasion and the dismemberment of the French armies, as in the times of Napoleon and Louis XIV. Early in the 19th century, it was the time of great humiliation and danger, wherein Austria and Prussia had sunk into their mutual rivalry, as the assistance they had from England and Russia had resulted in the unison of the War of Liberation to dethrone and expel Napoleon. In the 1850s, Bismarck, at the Frankfurt Diet, was able to convince that weakness of Germany could only be cured by a fratricidal war in which Austria would be forced to be expelled from the German politics. This reversed the situation between Germany and France, as it was now France which got weak and was in danger from a possible attack from the Rhine. League of the Three Emperors, 1872 to 1878. Between Prussia and Russia, there existed ancient bonds of friendship as their armies fought alongside to overthrow Napoleon. These bonds between Russia and Prussia were strengthened during the Polish uprising and the Crimean War of 1863. Both the powers had the common interests in the prevention of the re-establishment of the Polish independence. This could have deprived these countries from spoiling the Partition of Poland. During the Franco-Prussian War, Russia served Bismarck greatly by maintaining an attitude of benevolence and neutrality and by tending to restrain Austria from joining into France and seeking a policy movement for Sadowa. The long months which followed after the siege of Paris were a critical and difficult period, for Bismarck and Russia could have embarrassed him greatly. Bismarck therefore recognized the services given by Russia during the period of 1870 to 71 by the humiliation of the Black Sea clauses which were imposed on Russia after the Crimean War. On the other hand, Austria was ready to recognize the year 1866 as a fait accompli and to give up the hope of changing the arrangements made or established by Bismarck. Bismarck was able to bring about friendly establishments and relationships between Francis Joseph and Emperor William during the summer of 1871 on the lands of Austria. NearEastern Crisis, 1875 to 1878. Another great factor which threatened the harmony of the League of the Three Emperors was the outbreak of a new and prolonged crisis in the Balkans. The progressive decline of the sick man of Europe and the outrageous behaviour shown by his savage soldiers during the phase of his long suffering on the Christian subject led Russia to think about the possibility of his death. In Herzegovina, the cruelty reflected by the aristocracy of the land-owning people had converted a large portion of the Serbian blood into Mohammedanism such that they could live on better terms with the Turkish rulers, which caused or resulted in the uprising of the community of the unhappy Christian peasantry around the time of July 1875. This uprising gradually spread to Bosnia. The chief concern of Bismarck in the whole Eastern Crisis was to prevent the disturbance of the European peace and to maintaining a satisfactory relationship between Russia and Austria, which was established by the League of the Three Emperors at Berlin in December 1875. AustroGerman Alliance, 1879. The hostile relations between Germany and Russia were not confined to the personal bitterness which existed between the ministers or the recriminations of the media, press and newspapers. The commissions which were established for the execution of the terms of the Treaty of Berlin, the German delegates had to undergo with the constant dealings of Austria against Russia. In reply to this, Russia overtook the vigorous interest in the arms and pushed its troops and army into the western provinces of Poland towards the frontiers of Germany. At about the same time, Bismarck heard that one of his friend, Andrassy, was about to resign to be replaced by Baron Hamerly, on whom he could not count his friendship. In view of the upcoming possible danger from Russia, Bismarck decided to seek a defensive alliance with Austria while Andrassy being still in office. He, therefore, drew the Treaty of October 7, 1879, which was the base of the Austro-German Alliance. He wished the treaty to serve Austria and Germany such that they would promise each other to provide support in case the other was attacked by any third power, be it Russia, Italy or France. The treaty was of a 5-year duration and was meant to be renewable. It was also meant to be secret. The Austro-German Alliance consolidated the Central Empires, and until their collapse in November 1918, it became the foundation of the German policy. Under this pact, Austria and Germany protected each other against the rising upheaval of the Pan-Slavism, and if Germany was attacked by the French revanche, it could count upon the neutrality of Austria in the case of an outbreak of the Italian irredentism. Chapter 3. The System of Secret Alliances, 1890 to 1907. Franco-Russian Rapprochement, 1887 to 1891. The Franco-Russian Entente of 1891, which transformed into the Alliance of 1894, was the result of the feeling of isolation, the suspicions and the irritation against Germany which was present in both the countries. A rapprochement was made between them which was the counterbalance to the Triple Alliance in spite of the fundamental contrast between the absolutist and the republican forms of government at St. Petersburg and Paris. The generous promises of Bismarck to Russia in the alliance of the Three Emperors and the reinsurance treaty, this had irritated Alexander III to a great extent during the election of Ferdinand of Coburg as the Prince of Bulgaria. Ferdinand was hesitant to accept the throne of Bulgaria, but he was secretly persuaded into the acceptance on Bismarck's part. Bismarck had openly stated that Germany was not interested in Bulgaria and that Russia might have a free hand. The General Ambassador of Vienna was supposed to write a letter to Ferdinand in a secret manner to hint the support of Germany to Russia in case he accepted the Bulgaria's throne. The letter was conveyed to France to the Tsar as well. Though Bismarck managed to persuade Tsar later that the letter was fraud, there was no doubt that Alexander III had some feeling of bitterness towards Bismarck. Like France, he was irritated and suspicious at the public announcement of the renewal of the Triple Alliance in 1887. Soon after the renewal took place, the Italian Premier Crispi in July 1887 had paid a visit to Vienna and then had advanced to confer with Bismarck at Friedrichsruh. On his return journey, he had expressed his will that Italy wished well of Bulgaria and that they cannot allow the Mediterranean to be affected by Russia. The Franco-Russian Alliance of 1894. The sudden turn of events and situations led the Russians to listen to the French to maintain the closer relations. It is interesting to note that in view of the form of the Franco-Russian Alliance and later the Anglo-French military and naval arrangements, the negotiations were made by the Russian and French authorities and not by the regular representatives of the regular diplomats. The fact that the Triple Alliance had been renewed and published to the world by the Italian Premier, Rudini, during a speech made on 29 June 1891. It was at the same time he took the opportunity to refer to the existence of Italy on agreements with England in a way to strengthen the suspicion of the Franco-Russian that England had joined the Triple Alliance. This was a quadruple coalition, and it was quite annoying to the Russians that it aimed merely at the preservation of the status quo, while it wanted to open the Dardanelles and to the French Empire, which had not completed the development of the colonial empire in Africa in the western Mediterranean region. In addition to the suspicion of the Triple Alliance, Gers and Alexander III got alarmed by the strong attitude adopted by the French with regard to the dispute between the Greek Orthodox clergy and the Roman Catholic on the concern of a Church of Nativity and Bethlehem. They also realized the importance of ensuring that the French friendship was secure in case of borrowing more money at Paris. England at the Partition, 1890 to 1898. The traditional policy of England, which had been of splendid isolation, had been subdued as by keeping its hand free it could enjoy the balance of power in Europe between the groups of the continents. In the years which followed the Franco-Russian War, England was still adamant at its traditional policy. Bismarck approached England thrice to have an alliance with Germany, once in September 1879, other in November 1887, and the last one at January 1889. But all these times Bismarck had to lose, as Lord Salisbury was in a fear that he could not get the approval of the Parliament for such a policy. England made no move to depart from its no-alliance policy, which was to merely make an entente with Austria and Italy in 1887. These three countries expressed their common intent to maintain the status quo and peace in the Turkey and Eastern Mediterranean. With this agreement, England was not bound by any sort of military obligations, but it had to confirm its friendly relations with the Triple Alliance. But by the time the formation of the Franco-Russian Alliance happened, England seemed to have come to the conclusion of parting the ways. With her weak position in Egypt, England was greatly exposed to the oppositions of the continental powers. The Anglo-French Entente, 1904. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of France, M. Declars, in June 1898, had declared the first object of his policy was to secure the rapprochement with England. If by chance France had to expand its colonial empire, the age-long hostility with England would come to an end. Declars thereof took effective and precautionary steps towards reconciliation with perfidious Albion. He approved of the treaty to settle the dispute with Anglo-French boundaries in the Niger Valley. On 21 March 1899, he reached the agreement with England that it would delimit the French and the English on spheres of influence in the region between the Congo and the Upper Nile. He only opened way better for the Anglo-French relations. The public opinion in both the countries was still hostile. It got more aggravated by the Boer War. Meanwhile, the death of Queen Victoria in 1901 and the retirement of Lord Salisbury in 1902 opened the ways for two men who were quite enthusiastic to maintain closer relations with France, Lord Lansdowne and Edward VII. The new king, Edward VII, has spent much of his time as the Prince of Wales in Paris and on the Riviera. He was quite familiar with the French habits and spoke French with much ease. He had warm relations and disposition towards France and even had a strong liking for the French people. In 1903, he visited France as the king and was greeted in a warm manner. The President Loubet of France greeted King Edward with a return gift that was the cordiality from both the sides. Chapter 4. The Morocco Crisis of 1905. The Kaiser's visit to Tangier on 30th of March 1905 was believed in England and France to be the main cause of the Declared fall on 6th June. This was the result of the German efforts, which was a threat of force to test or break the newly formed Entente Cordiale to separate England from France. However, the misconception had arisen from the ignorance and the prejudice of some parts of the nation. Bülow and Kaiser both felt the need to do something, but their opinions changed considerably. Bülow wished to wait for the formal notification of Declares about the Germany, making it with the Moroccan agreement. When Declare ignored Germany for almost a year, Bülow tried to take his notice by forcing Kaiser to make the spectacular gesture at Tangier in March 1905. Kaiser, on the other hand, had wished to alienate the susceptibilities of France. He had an anti-English complex, and with the inherited friendship he had with Romanov and Hohenzollern, he wished to avert the upcoming danger in the Anglo-French agreement by making his dream of the Continental League. The optimism of Kaiser and his emotional fervour were given cold reactions by Bülow. His chancellor threatened him that he would not resign. He assumed that Kaiser had his own responsibility to modify the draft which was sent to him by the Foreign Office. Kaiser was soon to suffer from when Tsar revealed the treaty to his Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Count Lambsdorff. Kaiser then made an attempt to secure the defensive alliance with Russia to the Moroccan moves by his chancellor. The latter became more important as this gave rise to the Moroccan crisis in 1905. It also led to the intimate military and naval conversations and alliances between England and France, which were of the highest significance to the development of the secret alliances. France was now given a free hand in Morocco by England, and it tried to establish a French economy of monopoly as well as proper colonies here in Morocco. There were two ways left with Germany to express its wishes. The first one was by telling Declare in a friendly manner that the recently published Anglo-French Convention had aroused the concern in Germany with regard to the commercial interests, and to guarantee France would offer the protection of these interests. The second wish was that maintain an impressive silence to neither recognize nor protest against the Anglo-French agreement, but to act as if it did not exist for Germany. This plan would consist of involving Germany further towards France in Morocco in terms of policy to curb the anarchy measures. Conclusion. None of the powers of the world wanted the World War I. The governing rules and the ministers of the governments of various countries had foreseen that it would be quite a struggle in which the political results would be highly uncertain and would also result in the loss of lives, suffering, and it was bound to result in the terrible economic consequences. For many powers of the world World War I might have held certain advantages. For instance, for Serbia, it was the achievement of the national unity for all the Serbians. For Austria, it was the revival of its prestige as a great power. For Russia, it was the accomplishment of the historic mission of the control over the Straits and the Constantinople. For Germany, it was the new economic advantages and the restoration of the balance of Europe which altered the weakening of the Triple Alliance and the strengthening of the Triple Entente. For France, it was the recovery of the Alsace-Lorraine and the ending of the German menace. For England, it was the destruction of Prussian militarism and of the destruction of the naval danger from Germany. All these advantages offered by the World War I to these great powers were intrigued and striven feverishly on all sides at the moment when the war broke out. The reason for the break of the World War I was due to the fact that the military and political leaders did certain things which led to the declarations and the mobilizations of the war, and failed to do certain things which might have prevented them from doing so. All the great powers of the world were responsible to a lesser or greater degree. Austria was more responsible for the direct origin of the World War I than any other power of the world. However, it presented itself as playing the role in self-defense and not against the military attack. It displayed its motive against the corrosion of the Greater Serbia and the agitation of Yugoslav, which threatened its mere existence by its leaders. Russia was believed to intrigue with Romania and Serbia against the dual monarchy. The geographical position of Germany between Russia and France, and its inferior number of troops, made it construct the plan of the crushing of the French army and then turning it against Russia. The responsibility of Russia also lay in the secret military measures which it was carrying on the diplomatic negotiations. This act alarmed Austria and Germany, but with the general mobilization of Russia was made when Germany was trying to bring Austria to a settlement which caused Germany to mobilize and declare war. As Turkey declines in power, Austria and Russia became greatly jealous of each other's influence in the Balkans. Russia now wished to achieve its historic mission, while Austria thought of the prevention of any possible danger from threatening it from the powers of the Great Slav on the southern frontiers of the nation. The League of the Three Emperors and Bismarck, and the later venture of Russia into the Far East, prevented this rivalry for many years from hampering and disturbing the peace of Europe. However, with the ambitious aims of Count Eichenthal and M. Izvolsky, the rivalry became acute and severe during the outcome of the Buchlau bargain. Eichenthal succeeded in taking powers of Bosnia and Herzegovina. At the same time, M. Izvolsky failed to open the straits as Austria has the support of Germany. However, England was reluctant to give acceptance to the one-sided proposal of Izvolsky to open the straits to the warships of Russia, but not to those belonging to the great powers. The annexation crisis was thus carried out without the use of power and war, which was all because of the solution provided by Germany. The verdict of the Versailles Treaty stated that Germany and its allies were responsible for the World War I, which should be, however, revised. The popular feeling, which was widespread among the Entente countries, became doubtful whether a legal and formal revision by the historical scholars and through public opinion